Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of Social Work Services Committee on Thursday, the 2nd of December 2021. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Council website for public listening. Can I remind members to follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off video when you're not addressing the meeting? And should you wish to contribute to any item, please write "speak" in the Teams chat function or indicate to the clerk, and you'll be invited to speak in order about new issues. Should your question or issue be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that we can deal with the business as efficiently as possible. If you need to leave the meeting for any reason, could I remind you to leave the Teams meeting for that period of time, and if you could also write "leave" in the Teams chat function and then join when you return, and this will allow us to monitor member presence. In a change to the published agenda today, we have agreed to take an exempt report as an urgent item of business. Committee members should have received this yesterday by email or on their Modern Gov app on their tablets, so we can deal with that later in the agenda. Firstly, it's the sederunt and apologies. Claire, could you provide the sederunt apologies, and who's participating remotely, please?
Thank you, Chair. For the benefit of members on Teams, I can confirm we have 3 members present in the Council Hall this morning, being yourself, the Vice Chair, and Councillor Sloan. Apologies from Councillor John Campbell. Present on Teams, we have Councillor Bell, Dempster, Ferguson, Howie, Lever, Little, Maitland, Murray, and the rest of the members currently not present, but I'll obviously monitor that, Chair.
Thanks, Claire. I confirm agreement to the participation of those members named as participating remotely. That takes us... Oh, we've got a hand up somewhere on the screen here.
Yeah, I'm present. She didn't say my name.
All right, thanks, Gail.
Stephen, I think I'm the same.
So we've got Councillor Ferguson and Councillor McGregor.
Yes, yeah, apologies if I missed you, Councillor Ferguson and Councillor McGregor. Yes, the Teams present is for a forever changing list at the start of a committee, so noted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. We might move on now to declarations of interest. Do any members have any? I'm not seeing anything in the Teams or the chat function, so we can note that and move on to the minute of the previous meeting of the 6th of October 2021. This is for noting. Are members happy to note that?
Noted.
Thank you. That takes us on to item 4, which is the Social Work Services Revenue Budget Monitoring Report for the period ended 30th September. This is to provide members with an overview of the financial performance against the budget for that period, including details of the continuing financial implications of the pandemic response and subsequent recovery. We've got Janet Sutton, the Finance Officer, with us to assist with any questions. Janet, is there anything you'd like to add to the report?
I've nothing to add to the report, Chair.
Thank you. Over to members then. Any questions on this report? Right, there's nothing coming up in the chat, so congratulations on writing a very comprehensive report that answers all the questions that could be asked. Are members happy to note this report? It's there in front of us for noting, so we can go forward on that basis.
Noted.
Thank you. That takes us to item 5, which is the Fostering Service Recruitment and Retention of Foster Carers report. This provides details of some of the challenges facing the fostering services and also the factors which impact on recruitment and retaining foster carers on behalf of the Council. Obviously, we're being asked to consider the recommendations for a fee-based scheme to give us a better chance of recruiting and retaining fostering households. We've got, it would normally, I think, be Sheila Clingan, but she's on leave just now. So, Stephen Morgan, do you want to add anything to the report?
Thank you, Chair. I think the report's quite clear. We've had a significant reduction in the number of foster carers over recent years. largely down to the age profile. And at the same time, we've struggled to recruit carers, and we have some evidence that some of the people who've come forward to ourselves and our recruitment drives over the last number of years have gone to other agencies or local authorities because of the fee. So there's also been a significant increase this year in having to purchase foster placements out with, which largely links to the overspend in the previous paper. So the proposal here is to introduce a fee so we can recruit more carers, and we would anticipate that, you know, any placement that we pay with a new model would be around about £22,000 per year cheaper than purchasing an average price external placement. So some of this is about cost avoidance, but there's clearly a risk in terms of the increase in the budget, and if all of the children don't come back into region, you know, could be an extra cost there. So the proposal is in front of members for consideration, and we would hope to you know, have that fee in the future and put that through the budget setting exercise. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Stephen. Over to members. Are there any questions on the report or what Stephen's said about it? Councillor Murray, and then I'll bring Councillor Sloan in.
Okay, I'm not quite sure whether I think it's hung up.
I can hear you, Councillor Murray, but you're a wee bit quiet.
Sorry, my system hung up for a minute there. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, you're coming through clearly now.
Yeah. It was just an explanation for 3.8. I didn't quite understand the statement that for every fostering placement at a cost of 22k, we would need 16 young people to return to live in Dumfries and Galloway within the year to be cost neutral. I wasn't quite sure how that was calculated. You know, the 16 people to come back to save 22k. I just didn't really see how that computed for the information in the paper. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair question, and I'll bring Stephen in, but I think in order to operate the fee scheme, there would have to be an uplift in the baseline budget, if you like. So that would be an increase anyway. And then any overspend which we're currently having would effectively become cost neutral if 16 currently out with the region placements came back into region. So, but I'll let Stephen explain that maybe more accurately.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Murray. Yeah, colleagues in finance looked at the average cost of an external placement currently being around about £43,000 to £44,000 per annum. A new cost of a foster carer getting paid the fee and an allowance for a child would produce an average savings of £22,000. So in order to break even in terms of the investment that would be required, 16 young people would have to come back in year to make that cost neutral. However, you know, we wouldn't get 16 children back immediately, so that was just to illustrate what the risk would be financially speaking.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Murray? Does that clarify?
Yeah, I'm presuming the 22k is the additional cost per child of the fees, is it?
The £22,000 is the difference between the cost of an allowance and a fee locally and the average cost of an external placement. So we're around about £43,000 for an external placement and around about £21,000 for a local placement with a fee. So that's where the 22 comes from.
Okay, that's fine. Yep, it just wasn't clear.
Thanks for that explanation. We've got Councillor Sloan to speak.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering what it says agree an introduction of a fee-based scheme for fostering households. I'd be interested to know what's actually involved in that and what the difference is. But it talks about independent foster carers. What's the difference between an independent foster carer and council-based social services?
So, Stephen, there's the difference of the fee and also the independence thing.
I'll I'll start with the independent element first. So an independent foster carer is a foster carer who's employed by a fostering agency that's not the council. So that's where the independent foster carers come from. And you know, a local foster carer is somebody that we recruit through the social work service. In relation to the fee, how that would work is once we have a foster carer recruited and approved and a child is placed, all children in Scotland get a fostering allowance, and some local authorities also give all carers a fee. Now, we are one of the few who don't pay a fee at all, so that fee would become an automatic payment when the foster carer is approved and has a child with them.
Where do the independent foster carers recruit from?
It's independent fostering agencies. So there are quite a number of independent fostering agencies in Scotland and the rest of the UK, and they operate independently from local authorities, so that's where they come from. It's an open market, effectively, in that respect.
So you've got the middleman taking his cut.
Put bluntly, yes, we do, and that's why the costs of those placements are extremely high.
It's a point well made, though, and I think that's, you know, it's very much in line with our values to keep our children placed as locally as possible, and obviously to I suppose, value the people in the region who are providing that fostering service for us. And obviously would rather avoid using an agency-type approach when this would be much more in line with our values, I think. So I think I can't see any other questions in the chat. So presumably members won't mind me going to the recommendations, which is effectively to note the reduction in number of foster carers at 2.1, to note the disparity between the total remuneration available to foster carers as opposed to the surrounding local authorities at 2.2. 2.3 is to note the recent inability of the fostering service to meet the increasing demands. And 2.4 is to note the risk of failing to provide an in-region fostering placement, which is both a failure to meet our corporate parenting responsibilities for our most vulnerable children. And 2.5 is where we were being asked to agree the introduction of a fee-based scheme. But the way that we are required to do this in terms of governance is to make to agree this, and that it should be considered as part of the budget setting process, because it basically affects the revenue budget for social work services. So on that basis, are we happy to agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed. So, Vice Chair?
Should we have a recommendation in there about trying to recruit new foster carers?
I'll maybe ask Stephen to come in, but in terms of how we go about then recruiting people, just for clarity, would you be able to help with that, Stephen? Yeah, we have an ongoing programme of recruitment, and we do a drive of a minimum of twice per year, so that's something that we do as ordinary business. So I can assure members that that's something that we will do. And our hope is that with this increase, with the fee and the increased remuneration, that we'll be much more successful than we have been recently.
Okay, I can go with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are now agreed, and we can move on to the next item, which is item 6. This is the delivery of unpaid work. And this is really to inform members of the extent of the impact in delivering unpaid work services, also in court activity in relation to new unpaid work orders, hours worked by service users, and the backlog of unpaid work hours. We have Catherine Knight with us, who's Locality Manager of Justice Social Work. Hello, Catherine. And
Hi.
Anything you'd like to add to the report? Obviously, there's quite a lot of detail here, and it's a bit of a moving picture, but obviously we're having to be quite creative locally. But that's kind of worked quite successfully in a lot of cases. So is there anything you'd like to add to the report?
Yes, thanks, Chair. There's nothing specifically that needs to be added to the report, and clearly I'm happy to answer any questions. I think it's just to commend the team in being able to maintain the delivery of the unpaid work service throughout the pandemic. I think compared with other areas across Scotland, we were the first to come back to face-to-face business as soon as we could, and therefore we've done very well in terms of continuing to work throughout the pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. And I think members will be pleased to recognise that as part of the recommendations. So, but over to members in terms of any questions from members. Councillor Howie. Councillor Howie, your question's up now. You may be on
Apologies,
mute.
Chair. I'm having issues with my microphone. It seems to have come on now. Catherine, 3.6, it's welcome to see the service back up and running again. And it's just a general question, I'm sure other members like myself, how can members bid in to the service for the types of work described and carried out in their wards?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Howie. The process for that remains as it has always been. There is a standard referral form that can be found on the council website following a few clicks. And certainly that referral process continues to be in place. Clearly, the difference is in terms of which types of project we can take on board, given any particular restrictions at any given time. So clearly, we'll just respond to those on a request by request basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Little.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to ask Catherine, it says that we're up and running with the face-to-face. Are we up and running fully with the face-to-face? Because I know one of the strongest elements of the unpaid work is the contact with community, and then being community-based and being part of something. So lockdown, although I commend highly to the team for being able to keep this going, it was difficult to find a way. I know it was difficult to find a way to deliver it to the fullest to make it the best for the service users. So are we up and running fully face-to-face now?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Little, for the question. I suppose the answer is yes and no. Certainly, all service users are able to attend their unpaid work on a face-to-face basis. So in that respect, yes, we are back up and running as restrictions stand at the moment. We are able to continue with that and comply with all the COVID-friendly requirements. Where the restrictions still are, though, are in terms of what type of project we can respond to. So the projects that we're working on also need to adhere to council COVID-friendly working practices. So we're doing to do more outdoor-based activities and fewer of the restricted indoor-based activities. Certainly, part of our plans in moving forward and ensuring we can continue to run as we have is using funds that have been provided by Scottish Government. We are developing the outdoor spaces at our key unpaid work depots. So those will be the new premises that we have in Annan, the premises at unpaid work at King Street. We invested a lot in the Black Parks site a couple of years ago, so the outdoor space there does enable a lot of outdoor work already, but we're looking to improve that still. So we're looking to invest in clearly ensuring we've got the appropriate equipment. That means we can do the outdoor-based activity that is depot-based. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Can I come back in, Chair, please, just a second?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. No, that's great. Thank you. What's the level of community involvement. I know that some of the things that we did, we sort of swapped over to before were things like being involved with the COVID drags and things, you know. Things that are not involved in the community being part of something. The biggest benefit to this scheme is community involvement. People who are offenders being part of something. It's really, you know, offending. So what kind of the level of that are we back to? I know we're doing a lot more outdoor stuff, but, you know, are they outdoor but alone or just with other offenders, or are they outdoor as part of the community? You know what I mean? Sorry.
Yes, indeed. That continues to be an area where we're focusing on moving forward. At the moment, the majority of the outdoor-based activities that are actually within communities, we've done an awful lot of litter picking and sort of ground clearances, types of things. The type of project that's taking the longest and is the hardest to get back up and running are the personal placements, because they would typically be in charity shops, those type of environments where we're not able to get service users back indoors because they are predominantly indoors. But certainly that's an area we're keeping a check on, and we are progressing and responding to that at the appropriate pace in terms of restrictions that are in place at any one time.
Thank you for that, and I commend the team, because this is a really important and vital service. I'm a big supporter of it. Thank you for everything that you've managed to do over the pandemic and always continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Little.
Thanks, Councillor Little. I think we've got Councillor Andy Ferguson up next.
Thanks. Morning, Kath. Hope you're well. The family. Yep.
Yes. Good morning, Andy. Morning, Councillor.
That's okay. Given it's freezing outside, and are we going to start doing more work with the Winter Warmth campaign? Because I know the youth service have been doing it this year, and it's good intergenerational work for them. I totally get that. But given the whole project was started in criminal justice in the first place, are we going to recover ownership of it? And also suggest that the only thing a few years ago, not that many years ago, that the inspectorate said was a good example of progressive social work, and then we stopped doing it. I can see you raising your eyes, and I'm just wondering if there are plans to re-engage with the voluntary organisation who help administer that programme.
Thanks, Andy, for the question. I was just going to say, I think there has been a few matters raised about that, but it's maybe down to whether or not you pay for the logs or whatever, and it's maybe something you can maybe help with, Catherine, because I understand obviously we'd want to work with groups, but they would have to sort of fit in with the sort of requirements of delivering certain services.
Indeed, there have been a number of challenges in terms of the Winter Warmth project, most notably, I suppose, in terms of what our involvement in that project typically entailed were groups of service users around the region to deliver the logs. This involved lengthy periods of times in the van, and whilst that did present positive opportunities in terms of engagement with the people the logs were being delivered to, a large proportion of the time was spent sat in the van. So you could question whether that was truly of benefit to communities and to service users. The other issue was around the quality of the wood. I believe there were some legislative changes which meant the wood that we had been providing no longer satisfied the particular standard required. So that also required a rethink. Where we've got to is we've kind of reached a compromise which I think provides the benefit for us in terms of we are more than happy and we continue to process the wood for kindling, and certainly the wood that is processed for kindling is made available, and a number of community groups, I believe, will come to our depots, will take an amount of the kindling, and they will distribute the wood themselves. So that has actually worked out better, I would argue, in terms of using the skills available from the unpaid work scheme to ensure that we provide the wood that does meet the standard required, and that's purely in terms of the kindling. So at the moment, there are no particular plans to return to the model that we had pre-pandemic. Certainly at the moment, the issue is around vans and not having service users just spending their time in vans all day. And I believe that what has developed instead is meeting the needs of the project. We'll continue to be involved in terms of the wood processing aspect of the project.
Thanks, Catherine. Councillor Ferguson, does that help clarify where we're at now?
Well, it does, and if I pick Catherine up right, we're helping in the preparation rather than the distribution, right? And that's totally fine by me, because that's turning the clock back for nearly 20 years, Kath, isn't it? So yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm happy with that, Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. I can't see any other hands up or questions in the chat. So if we move towards the recommendations, we've been asked to note the impact COVID-19 continues to have on the delivery of unpaid work. And 2.2, obviously we've heard from members already, but also to commend the unpaid work team's continued efforts to ensure the service delivery is responsive to the change in levels. So I'm sure the committee would be wholeheartedly behind supporting the team, so thank you very much. And also 2.3, to agree that a future report will be brought to members outlining how COVID-19 impacts on delivery of unpaid work in the longer term. Are we happy to agree recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. That takes us...
Sorry, could I just make a final comment in terms of if any members are interested in actually coming to one of our depots, there is an open invitation at a time that suits. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and I hope members are confident now that they can avail themselves of that invitation, because I know some people might have been wary about turning up at a depot during restrictions, but no, that's a very kind invitation, and I'm sure it would be a great benefit to members to see firsthand what's happening. Thank you. So that takes us on to item 7, which is the Transformation Programme, Early and Effective Intervention, Family Support. This is a progress report of the early and effective intervention work following our decision to invest in the Transformation Programme in July 2020. The team has now been in place for literally a year, or just over a year, and we're seeing the evidence of the impact it's having. We've got Sarah McGarvey here, who's a locality manager and who also features prominently in photograph form in the appended report. Sarah, is there anything you'd like to add about the work of the team and the impact so far?
Okay, thank you. Hello. Not particularly, just maybe to highlight the fact that the team have been working really well, and it has been our year this year, our first anniversary of the team. The focus on the early intervention we feel is working really well. We've got evidence of families where there's possibly been future things that have come up for them after we've closed or ended our work with families, but we've not had to pick that up again because they've followed the strategies that we've developed with them, used their networks and made really good progress. So we see that at the moment we've got about a 50-50 caseload with families we work just with the family support team and families that we work, well, obviously with other agencies and everything as well, and then families we work with social workers from the locality teams. And we see that balance changing probably as time goes on to more of the early families that we work with just ourselves, because we can see how effective that is. Where doing further evaluations with families, so I should be able to provide some more information on that in the next report, because they are there's a number of evaluations that are going on. One of those that Stephen mentioned before, where young people are being looked after, young people are being spoken to. We're also doing an audit of all the families we work, of a portion of the families we work with in children and family social work. So we don't want to kind of be consulting families twice. So we need to make sure we do that properly. And we want to encourage, with our early support to families, referrals coming almost straight from health visitors and from schools, where families are kind of wary of social work involvement. They can, but they feel that that's helpful. They can put the referral through our access team, and it will come straight to family support. So there's various things that we're developing, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
I'll maybe just bring in Stephen Morgan to add a little bit on some of the items there.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in relation to the consultation that Sarah just made reference to, I mentioned that earlier in a pre-meeting, so other members haven't heard about that, but that's okay. But just for clarity, one of the things that we're doing locally is we're taking part in a national pilot project called Bright Spots, which is a project that's been ongoing in other parts of the UK for a number of years now. And it's been developed by looked after children and care experienced young people. And the programme will be supported interviews, online questionnaires, etc., to look at what changes that our children and young people think they need in the care system. So this links into the promise paper, which comes next as well. And by March of 2022, we're going to have some really, really rich data from our young people, and that will change the emphasis of our corporate parenting plan. So I'll speak more about that later, but that ties in like hand in glove with the work of the early intervention team, because family support is one of the key themes from the Scottish Government and some investment as we move forward. So that really links to 3.6 of this report in terms of mapping out what family support is available currently in Dumfries and Galloway, where the gaps are and how those gaps might be filled in the future through either our own services as a council or some strategic commissioning with the third sector. So that kind of links the two papers a wee bit, but I think it's important just to pick up on that point.
Thanks, Stephen. I mean, I do have a question of my own, but over to members first in terms of what we've heard so far. I see a hand up, but I cannot identify who it is yet. Councillor Maitland.
Sorry, Chairman. Just where I am, I can't use the chat. I was interested, and I wonder if Sarah could possibly help us with respect to the referral children not accepted and referral families not accepted, because while I think this is a fantastic initiative and really important work's being done and clearly successful work. There are some people who are not accepted. Could we possibly have a little bit of an expansion on that, please?
Okay, thanks, Jane. I think that's, just for members, that's page 49 in the appendix, where it shows the table. Is that something you can add detail to, Sarah?
That could be. It could be referrals that have been made to us that don't quite meet our criteria, and that doesn't happen very often. But there are sometimes a few that don't quite fit with what we're doing, or they're not clear, or by the time the social workers made the referral, a situation is resolved, or the family feel that they have other supports in place. So there aren't many of those, but we have to be quite clear what our role is. We have to be, in order to be effective, because we could just be becoming part of a support of a family without having being clear about what we want to achieve. So sometimes it doesn't quite fit with what we've to do, but that doesn't happen very often. Is that okay?
Councillor Maitland, does that clarify?
Yes, thank you. I'm presuming that families would be signposted to other places. They wouldn't simply be left if they didn't quite
No.
area.
Yeah, well, what I really mean is where somebody else might be more appropriate supporting that family. Actually needs a social worker to be allocated, and so we would make sure that happened. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a note here just popped up in the chat from Nick Evans. I hope you can all see that, but it's just to advise participants to who speak to put their cameras on when called to speak, as it makes it easier for viewers to follow who's speaking at any particular time. I'm just reading out what's in front of me. And then an additional bit saying, if you have bandwidth problems, keep your camera off to protect your connection. So that's just for the benefit of the public who can't see the Teams chat. Anyway, no, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Jane, for the question. I did have a question just in terms about leveraging in external funds, which I think is in section 3.5 of the report. Is that something, obviously we'll be told there, we'll get a little bit more detail in terms of progress on how that money's sort of come in and what that's being used for in terms of third sector organisations. So obviously that section of money being used to leverage, if you like. Is there any detail you can provide about that just now, Sarah?
I could answer that question, Chair, if that's appropriate.
Sorry, I'll pass on to Stephen then.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we've been really successful working in partnership with a number of third sector organisations where we've given them relatively small sums of money, and that's allowed them to access bids from external funding bodies. At this moment in time, we've got one such bid in, which, if successful, will bring over £100,000 per annum for 5 years into one of our third sector providers, and that would be looking at whole family support as well. So linking to Councillor Maitland's question around about some of the families that don't meet our criteria, we do signpost, and part of the work that Sarah and her team will be doing over the next 12 months will be looking at where the gaps are in terms of what we do, what the third sector do, and the money that we're leveraging in is filling some of those gaps and enhancing services elsewhere. So yeah, the investment of the third sector really does lever in a significant sum into Dumfries and Galloway.
Thanks, Stephen, and hopefully we'll see details of that in a future report, as it says there. Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, Stephen. So, Sarah, I'm just wondering here, and I'm hoping this is helpful rather than it's not meant as a criticism. It would have been really helpful, I think, if we could have seen the areas of SIMD where you're actually working. Two reasons. One, obviously, it opens some doors in terms of funding externally, but more especially, it dispels the myth that you only work in areas where there's high deprivation. The spread here is shown as it's right across the region where you're up. And if there's a way we can weave that into future reports so that we've got an idea. Merely a suggestion, it's not a criticism. I hasten to stress that.
Okay, yeah, it can be difficult. Some of it is just like small, one family here, one family there, and trying to reflect that. But we are working wherever a family's referred to us where there's need, and there's such a variety of families we're working with that obviously the bigger population areas and towns, there's more referrals, but we are getting referrals from everywhere, and we are going to lots of families have had lots of different needs over this last wee while, and we have just been trying to, we just respond to all of those. So I'll try and look at how we can reflect that as well as we can for future report.
Yeah, can I come back in, Steve?
Yeah, of course, Andy.
I mean, we're obviously keen not to identify any family, so I totally take the point, but other types of funding, and that's one way that could help. So, yeah, okay, but I'll leave that in your capable hands. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Sarah. I think we've now got Councillor Murray to speak.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, obviously, this investment, the intention is to deliver for families and for vulnerable families. It's not to save money, although at some point, we hope that by investing in families early on, we prevent them from going on to other destinations, whether that's children having to be in care, or possibly later on people ending up in the prison system. It might be helpful, though, I mean, because people are looking at large sums of money being invested, actually, to get some sort of estimate, that if we weren't doing this, what would be the cost, to the public purse if we actually weren't putting this investment in, and these kids were ending up in care and so on. And actually, not because that's the most important reason for doing this, because it isn't, but just really to get some sort of balance on the purpose of the benefit of the investment as far as the more general public is concerned.
Well, I'll invite Stephen in first, and then Sarah, if you've got any additional comments. But Stephen?
Yep, thank you, Councillor Murray. We can absolutely provide data on the number of families that we've diverted from statutory social work and other interventions, and give you a cost range in terms of what that would cost for an average journey through the care system. Those pieces of information and that data is available through the National Promise team. And I've also recently reached out to them in relation to doing some socio-economic modelling locally for us. And hopefully their team will be able to put us into their work stream over the coming months to look specifically at what that would be from a Dumfries and Galloway perspective. But in the meantime, we can endeavour to provide a kind of a ballpark figure in terms of what the average cost of a child going through the care system would be and how many we've diverted. And I think it's important to emphasise that this service is really about cost avoidance, and that what we mean by that is we're likely to avoid significantly high costs in the future as opposed to necessarily making savings immediately. And I think the fact that we started the service in, I was going to say the middle, but we started it during a pandemic. I don't think any of us know where we are in terms of the pandemic's journey just yet. But with us starting in a pandemic and the impact the pandemic's had on people, especially vulnerable people, the pandemic has impacted the most vulnerable far more significantly, then this service has been absolutely phenomenal in terms of our response to that and how we move forward. So I kind of went beyond the question, Councillor, so apologies for that, but I think it was an important point to make. Thank you.
Councillor Murray, does that help answer your question? Obviously, Stephen's offered to provide a bit of localised data in terms of the cost avoidance, if you like.
Yes. I mean, I think that's, as I say, it's not the principal outcome that we want. We want the good, the best outcomes for the families and particularly for the children. But I think it would be useful to get some sort of idea how much of cost has been avoided by taking this action early on in the child's life.
No, absolutely, and I think that's part of the transformational shift, which is, the value of early intervention. You're almost measuring a different thing when you're talking about cost avoidance, because it's actually, the rewards are much greater when you invest earlier. And it does actually touch in the next paper. I think when we talk about the promise, which we'll come on to, and follow the money, it actually gives a sort of the cost of failures in the care system, if you like, is quite extreme. But we'll get on to that in the next item. But I can't see any other questions in the chat just now. So thanks, Sarah, for your input, and to Stephen as well. And we'll just go to the recommendations, which are to note the progress of the achievements of the Family Support Service since the service began a year ago, and also the planned development across and the actions for the next 12 months. And obviously there's a few bits of feedback there to feed into what the next report might look like in terms of additional data, if that's okay. So are members happy with that?
Great.
Thank you very much. Thanks again, Sarah. And that takes us on to item 8, which is the promise. So further to recent virtual seminar and presentations, which was well attended by members recently, this report invites us to look at the vision contained within the promise and what this means for us as corporate parents. So our promise document is appended from page 59 onwards in the papers, and that includes transformation activity, communication plan, corporate parenting plan, and within that the pledges that that we make as corporate parents. We've got Stephen Morgan here who can expand on what he introduced in the last item a little bit. And do you want to maybe add a little bit first before we invite members to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, a number of the papers presented today have the same theme. I mean, the promise is about the whole care system for our children and young people, and the fact that nationally it hasn't delivered the best outcomes for our youngsters in Scotland, and I think that's the same for every single local authority area. So what this paper does, following on from the seminar, is gives you the first kind of detailed look at the promise. And we've got a communication plan, we've got our promise, but what we've done is kind of retrofitted the promise to what we previously had. Now, the Bright Spots programme that I mentioned a few moments ago, where we have an in-depth set of communications and questions from our children and young people, will give us some really rich data where we completely transform what our plan and our promise looks like as we move forward. Now, I'm quite excited about hearing from our youngsters in a really in-depth way and actually being held to account by our children and young people in the future, as well as yourselves as elected members. So really happy to take any questions. I know there's an awful lot of data in here, but what you will see in the future is a completely different plan in the voice of our children from their experiences and what they expect us to do on their behalf. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. And as you say, there's quite a lot to absorb in here because it's quite rich in information. So over to members then. Any questions? Councillor Sloan.
It's not really a question, Chair, it's just an observation. I see there was another seminar held on the 12th of November. These seminars that have been held and workshops, these have been used as decision-making bodies. And that should only ever happen at the committee. Plus, we don't know, none of them, well, to my knowledge, none of the members get sent out the minutes from these seminars or workshops. I think that would be helpful. I know it's not just a subject, but it's...
Thanks for raising that, Councillor Sloan. I don't think there was any decisions made at the seminar, but it was really just an information session to be kept abreast of what the various strands of the promise were about, because obviously we might all know a little bit of the jigsaw, but we rarely see the whole thing, and I think it was good for that alone. We certainly didn't make any decisions there. I think there was a pack, I think, that was due to go out in terms of the presentations that were sent, but I don't know if it went to all members, so maybe that's something we can check. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Councillor Sloan. The seminar really was providing information. There was no recommendations, no decisions asked for. And what we did is we introduced what the promise was, and one of the national leads attended that. He gave some observations about the progress that we've made locally and where he thinks we are in relation to the 10-year plan. And then we had a number of rapid presentations from different projects that are ongoing across Dumfries and Galloway. What we do have that I could share is we recorded the seminar, but unfortunately there was a technical glitch and we only got about an hour of the 2 hours, so that could be distributed if that would be helpful to members.
I mean, would that certainly help? Obviously that's as much as we can get, but... Right, so if I'm picking you up correctly, the point that you want to make is really there's an awful lot of seminars generally, and you feel that they might be taken as decision-making forums when really it should only be at committee. Okay, well, I would certainly be of the view that it's committees that make decisions and seminars just inform us, I think. Yeah, okay, no, a fair point. In terms of questions on this report, any members got anything to add or ask Stephen while he's here? Councillor Maitland.
I hope my bandwidth does survive this. What I was going to ask you, Chairman, is about the level of attainment. I have to say I'm filled with gloom that our attainment levels for education, attainment levels for our children seem to be going in absolutely the wrong way. I mean, certainly in terms of our comparator, and I think in possibly in absolute terms, they're going the wrong way too. So, you know, we're listening about how we are going to be held to account by looked after children. I'm not absolutely certain that they will be in a position. I mean, how many 16, 17-year-olds are going to come up and tell us that we've done a rotten job in terms of driving forward their ability to attain educationally? They simply aren't. And I would like to know really how we are going to keep our thumb on this particular issue, because, you know, with the best will in the world, if you don't start out with the basic levels of literacy and numeracy, you're starting out with in life with one hand up your back. And I am actually not happy with what has been happening at the moment, and I would like some reassurance about how we as members are going to be able to see some level of improvement.
Thanks, Councillor Maitland. You know, it is very a prescient concern. I think, I mean, there is something about us reinstantiating our Champions Board. Well, that was one of our devices to keep a forum open for that kind of role as coming together as corporate parent and with looked after children. However, it's a wider issue than that, and obviously the programme, the Bright Spots programme that Stephen's mentioned, is maybe going some ways towards getting that a voice to feed in. But I'd imagine that would pull together a number of services and a number of different, drawing from a number of different backgrounds. So, Stephen, I don't know if you can assist Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for those comments, Councillor Maitland. In relation to the 16, 17-year-olds being able to tell us where we've failed or where we've had successes, the Bright Spots programme does enable children and young people to give us their views. It is a tried and tested programme, and I do have a fair degree of confidence that we will hear what we need to hear. But in relation to educational attainment, your comments are absolutely right. And I've had, in my role as chair of the corporate parenting group, had some quite detailed discussions with colleagues in the education service, and they absolutely acknowledge this as an area where we have to improve. And there's quite a lot of work going on about thinking how we change the emphasis of support for our looked after youngsters within the education service. Now, unfortunately, there's been a number of changes of personnel leading on that, because of different circumstances elsewhere. So by the time we report on the promise and our progress next time, then I will ask that the person who's leading on that from an education perspective gives us some detail and even comes along to the committee to give assurance that the approaches that we're proposing to use are achievable and that they are actually making a difference. So I'll speak to colleagues in education and make sure that we have that assurance in greater detail and explanation the next time we report, if that's acceptable.
Councillor Maitland, is that some assurance at least?
Well, it certainly starts, of course it does, and it would be churlish to refuse that. But I suppose, sorry, I've forgotten about I suppose really what I'm concerned about as well is if a child is not open to education, I mean, from its very, very earliest years, it starts again with a disadvantage. And it's not completely clear to me from this document, which I have to say I think is a very good document, it's not entirely clear to me about how we make certain that families engage with their children, their babies, at a really, really early age. You know, the singing, the reading, all these things are so important, and some families just don't understand how immensely important it is. So I wonder if I could have some assurance about that level of involvement in terms of, I suppose it's really health work, isn't it? Health workers who are engaged in the very, very early years, development years.
Thanks, Councillor Maitland. I mean, it should really be all the public agencies working as one, in a sense, at all stages of life. But Stephen, I don't know if you can maybe assist Jane with that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Maitland. That's an excellent point. And Councillor Thompson, you're absolutely right. It's all agencies who have a responsibility there. But this is part of the work that Sarah McGarver will be doing in terms of whole family support. And that will be from, the cradle up until, adulthood in this context. And we'll be looking at how that family support reminds families and teachers the parents the skills that they need, and that will be done on a multi-agency basis as well. But we do have to be much more thorough and clearer in our reporting in terms of the challenges that we have, the successes that we have, and where we're not doing as well. And we are well aware that this is an area that we do need to improve upon.
Thanks, Stephen, and hopefully, Jane, that does give you some assurance. As I say, or as Stephen has mentioned, it's maybe prudent to bring somebody along to the next report or update of this from education, or that lead person to actually give us their knowledge so that we as a committee can understand much better the whole picture. Councillor Ferguson.
I think it's actually leaders first, Stephen.
I'll defer to Councillor Murray. I'm just looking at the time of the posts, so I'm just wondering.
No, I have. No, that was a previous item. That's not solved.
Yeah, so it's all yours, Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, Stephen. And Stephen, the bit I'm talking about here, or I'm wanting to talk about a wee bit, is last Monday I was invited to a launch of the See Me campaign from the Young People's Participation Group at CAMS, and I think I was the only local authority member in the call. Maybe it was through my role in the health board, I'm not sure, but I'm wondering in the promise if we should be weaving something in here about working with not only education but also the NHS and the CAMS team in particular, just highlighting what we're doing for young people. I was highly impressed that time because these were youngsters who previously wouldn't talk to anybody, were very inclusive, rather than who've become inclusive, I should say, rather than being exclusive in the past. And I'm just wondering if there's is there an input into the promise from CAMS in particular? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. Stephen?
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. And before I answer your question, I'd just like to say that the See Me is an excellent programme and very welcomed. But yes, we do have health representation at the corporate parenting group. I think it is fair to say that during the pandemic, their ability to attend all meetings has been sometimes limited just because of the responses that they've had. But health and the health of our looked after children and care experienced young people is one of the main areas within our work, and particularly mental health, because we know that this group of youngsters have poorer mental health than the peers. So yes, we are linked, and again, once our colleagues in health are able to provide more detailed information, we will certainly present that through future reports. And we acknowledge that it's been a challenge for our colleagues, but they've certainly fed into the system, fed into the promise, and will continue to do so.
Is that helpful, Councillor Ferguson?
Can I come back, Stephen?
Yes, of course.
Stephen, thanks very much for that reassurance. It's hugely welcoming because and reassuring, I would suggest, for people just to know that we have got their finger on the pulse, and appreciate it's difficult to get this, especially this COVID time has been really difficult to get everybody working together. But on some things and in other things, of course, that's worked extremely well, as we all know. So thanks very much for that reassurance.
Thank you. And I take it from, within the report itself, I think this is really about how we refresh our corporate parenting over the coming months with something to come back in June 2022, as it says there. So I presume there'll be a lot of elements in terms of our partnerships and the voices feeding in that'll help shape that. So this isn't a document that we put back on a shelf. This is something that's actually going to be updated and reviewed, isn't it?
I anticipate that the papers you see in front of you today will look significantly different as we progress. And if they don't look significantly different, then we haven't progressed in the way that we need to. The promise is about fundamental change in the whole care system for our children and young people. And that starts from family support in the nuclear family, the wider family, in neighbourhoods, in communities, in care systems, etc. And the 10-year plan that the government have set out through the promise is here to stay. You know, it will deliver change, and therefore the starting point for us is that analysis from our young people through Bright Spots, how that will change what we do. And we've already seen examples of how we're transforming locally through the early and effective intervention service. We've seen a report at the last social work committee whereby, you know, we transformed Cairn Ryan House into a community hub. So the system will change, and what you see in future versions of this type of report will be considerably different. And if not, then I'll be here to be held to account, and we can watch this recording back and say, Stephen, you promised us something, you've got to deliver, and you know, we will.
Thanks, Stephen. Members, any further questions before we go to the recommendations? I can't see any hands up or anything else in the chat, so we've been asked to note the findings of the independent care review and the 7 output reports as detailed in 3.3 and 3.4. We're also asked to note the member seminar that took place on the 12th of November and further shared the outcome of the independent care review at the promise. We're asked to note our transformation agenda as set out in Appendix 1 and our communication plan set out in Appendix 2. And finally, note the update on progress delivering on the promise, which will be brought to this committee on a 6-monthly basis for review and scrutiny, and with Stephen's word as his bond and the video evidence to prove it, that will look different and will progress with all the influences that we want to see in the new plan going forward. Members, happy to agree?
Noted.
Thank you very much. That takes us on to item 9, which is the Dumfries and Galloway Public Protection Committee minute of the meeting of 24th of August 2021. This is just for noting. Are members happy to note?
Noted.
Thank you. Now, item 10. I have agreed, as I said at the start, to take an item of urgent business, which is item 10A, Singleton Park Care Home, which you should all have received. As this item is considered exempt, can we first agree to adopt a resolution to exclude the public from the meeting in terms of section 50A brackets 4 brackets and paragraphs 3, 4, 6, 9 and 11 of Schedule 7A of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. Are we happy to agree? Thank you very much. I think there's a Teams invite for the exempt item, which should be in your diaries, I believe. So if we can maybe take a moment just to shift over there, and we'll see you all over there.